One way to make your videos look more cinematic is to make it a letterboxed video. So an example of this is what I've included in the downloadable resources. There's a folder called Letterbox Overlays, and you can bring it all into Premiere Pro. These are PNG files that are formatted to specific aspect ratios that have been commonly used throughout film history. Now, there are dozens of additional ones. These are just a few examples. You could find freely available overlays like this online that have lots more, but I just wanted to give you some of the basics. For example, if I take this 235 CinemaScope PNG and we drag it onto the layer on top of our video clips and extend it to cover everything, you can see that it makes it that sort of widescreen aspect ratio. CinemaScope is one of the more popular or traditional ways to do this. Now, you want to make sure, depending on what your sequence settings are, that this clip matches the size of your sequence. So if I right-click and choose Set to Frame, or if you go up to Effect Controls, you can see that it's already scaled down to 50%. These PNG files are for the 4K resolution screen. So if you're shooting or editing something that's 1920 by 1080 or something smaller than 4K, you'll have to actually reduce the size of this, and just make sure that you go to right click and set to frame size, and that will make sure it's the proper aspect ratio. Now, this is a different way to doing this than actually editing on a widescreen sequence or a wider screen sequence. And the reason I suggest doing it this way is because when you are uploading to YouTube or different platforms, sometimes those wider sequences, those wider aspect ratios won't actually work. And I'll be talking about what that looks like in just a minute, but I just wanted to show you quickly at the beginning of this tutorial how to apply these different overlays. Now, I have different ones that aren't as cinematic. Square is one that if you just want something to be cropped as a square, maybe you edit something for social media as a square, but then you also want to export it for YouTube or edit it for YouTube as a square, you can pop that one on there. I have an extreme CinemaScope one. This is even wider. This is 300, the aspect ratio. And then I have some other standard ones like this 133. This is sort of the old school 4:3 aspect ratio that a lot of our old TVs used to be. So if you're editing something and you want it to be a little bit more vintage, you can do it like that. Definitely a way to add style to your video. All right, so that's how you apply these, but really what's going on? Let's talk a little bit more about aspect ratios. So you probably know some basics. You probably have heard of what 16:9 is. 16:9 is the standard aspect ratio for most television screens, computer screens. A lot of phones now are 16:9. Some are a little bit wider actually, but 16:9 is the common aspect ratio. That is different than the resolution. So in this chart, I have aspect ratios on the left, resolutions on the right. The aspect ratio is just that. It's the ratio of the width to the height of your screen. Now, common ones are like 16:9 or 4:3, which was sort of the older standard. This other number here on the column is another way to represent that aspect ratio, and that's just the result of this actual ratio or this fraction. So let me just show you what's actually going on. If I'm dividing 16:9, you get 178, rounded up. 4 divided by 3 is 133. And so these other ones like 185 or 235, which are common aspect ratios, there's not a clean ratio that looks like this. And that's why you'll hear it referred to as 235 or 185. And you commonly don't hear 178. It's not like you go into a store and say, oh, I want to get a TV that's 178. You say you want a 16:9 screen. It's just a different way to represent the same aspect ratio. On the right-hand side is the resolution that results from this ratio. And so we know that we have standard HD is 1920 pixels wide. And so the height of that screen will change depending on what the ratio is. So for 16 by 9, if we extrapolate that to 16 by 9 to HD, it's 1920 by 1080. 185 would be 1920 by 1038. So if for some reason you were trying to create a screen that's exactly this sequence size, you would use, or this ratio, you would use these settings. So say, let me just do that for you so you can see what that would look like. So if I say create new sequence, let me actually get over here so I can see what my numbers are. New sequence. Let's go to settings, and then we're going to actually set to a custom size. So let's just go to custom, and then frame size, we're going to do 1920 by 817. Okay, so you'll see that this ratio, it's not a clean ratio. 19,200 by 8987. That's not very clean. But if I click OK, now you'll see that this is that CinemaScope size. And so I could bring in my video clips, and I could bring this in here. I'm going to keep the existing settings, and then I can actually go in to my effects controls and scale up. This is almost the same idea as putting this CinemaScope overlay on this clip. Okay, so this is basically the same aspect ratio, but now the sequence is actually that aspect. Okay, and sometimes you might need to export like that or create a sequence like that. If you are actually editing a film to be played on a projector at a film festival, you might have to edit like this. It really depends on what the settings are that they require you to export in or export out of. So let me actually, this clip is actually zoomed in quite a bit, so let me zoom out. So here on this sequence, this is the standard HD sequence, remember. It's basically the same thing without the letterboxing, okay? So hopefully that makes sense, that what we're doing with 1920 by 817. Now, if we wanted to make that a 4K sequence, then we have to multiply by 2. 1920 times 2, 3840, that's our standard 4K resolution width, and then 817 times 2. So those are the numbers that you would put in if you were trying to create this 2:3:5 aspect ratio for a 4K sequence. Does that make sense? So here's just a couple quick examples. We've kind of already seen this, but this is what it looks like for these different aspect ratios. 2:3:5, which is the same as the 1920 by 817 resolution. This is what it looks like. And then here is what 4:3 would look like on this 16 by 9 sequence setting. So we have that overlay, so it's much more square than 16 by 9. One thing to note about adjusting your video with these overlays is you might have to move up or down the video clip to make sure whatever you want in frame to be seen. So for example, this shot of them holding hands, I would probably move up just a little bit so that their hands aren't being cut off. And then here, same with their chins, I would probably move it up just a little bit, at least for his chin to be seen. You kind of have to balance what you're seeing and what you're not seeing. Same here. Let's see, for this clip, we're going to zoom out. And it really depends on what you want to see. Do we want to see the top of the mountains? That looks pretty dang awesome. So that's a bit more about adding style with these overlays and a little bit more in-depth education on what aspect ratios are, what it means compared to resolution. If you go online and you want to find out what aspect ratio you should use for a different resolution. There's lots of cheat sheets online that list out all of the aspect ratios with all of the resolutions that you may want to use. All right, thanks so much. If I confused you, let me know. If you need further clarification, let me know. And I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.